If you're a fantasy sci-fi reader like me, you might think nonfiction books are snooze fests. But to prove that wrong, I've compiled a list of 12 nonfiction books that read like fiction, thanks to the recommendations I received in this YouTube short. And I'm not including the more popular choices like these or like self-help, because when I hear nonfiction, I already think of all these, and I wanted to highlight some new fresh recs that I've never personally heard of. So in this video, I'm gonna give you a short summary on each of these books and my initial thoughts on them. Let's get into it. The Wager by David Gran. In 1742, a ramshackle boat landed ashore on Brazil, carrying 30 emaciated survivors of the British warship The Wager. And these survivors say that the Wager had shipwrecked on the desolate island, and these 30 men survived months stranded there and eventually sailed 3,000 miles through brutal seas to safety. They were hailed as heroes. But then 6 months later, another ramshackle boat landed on the coast of Chile. But this boat carried just 3 castaways from The Wager who told a very different story. They were like, yo, those 30 survivors that landed in Brazil, they're not heroes, they're mutineers, they're murderers. And it becomes clear that while stranded on this island, the crew of The Wager had fallen into anarchy, with warring factions in this barren wilderness. So this book being recommended to me spurred this entire video, not gonna lie. I was over at my wife's friend's house, chatting it up with her husband, and during our conversation, one of us brought up Red Rising, as you do, and that turned our small talk into a lifelong bond of 2 bloody damn howlers. We segued our invigorating conversation into other fantasy and sci-fi books, and then he proceeded to tell me about this book, The Wager. And this was the first nonfiction book pitched to me in years, maybe ever, that actually sounded interesting. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat listening to him tell me about this book, and it was a pretty big seat. It was a bigger seat than this. It sounds like fiction. Like when I just gave you that summary, that sounded like fiction. Am I wrong? But it's not. It's the real deal. It's real life. I'm pretty sure he told me that this book is actually recommended reading for like the Army or Navy. But someone fact checked me on that. I just did a quick Google and it, who knows though. Anyways, this sounds like a real life Lord of the Flies, where we read about survival and endurance, but also human nature of what people do in these life or death situations. I mean, I just watched Squid Game The Challenge, and that had my heart pumping. I was like holding back tears for certain eliminations. I was feeling betrayed, and that's just a reality show. Imagine actually being stranded on a desolate island. That would blow. Quick question, what book would you bring if you were stranded on an island? Maybe The Wager. I mean, that could be actually maybe helpful to read. But yeah, this book is firmly placed onto my TBR because it was also the most liked recommendation comment on that short that I made. And it's actually written by the guy who wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, like the Leo and Scorsese movie that just came out. That was a book before. And we might just talk about that a little later on in the video. Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. So this is a first-hand account of the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, in which a severe storm struck climbers near the summit. The author of this book was on the expedition as a journalist, and he vividly portrays the climbers' struggle with altitude, exhaustion, frostbite, starvation, life or death situations. He details both the physical dangers and the emotional toll. Honestly, Mount Everest fascinates me. I mean, you're crazy if it doesn't fascinate you. It's almost like the Roman Empire of mountains, because it's something I would just never consider doing. Climbing it. I mean, is climbing even the right word? Scaling? I mean, climbing sounds like such a small word for what you need to do to Mount Everest to get to the top. Yeah, I couldn't imagine climbing Mount Everest. I climbed Mount Washington in New Hampshire on a brisk sunny fall day, and I was so tired once I got to the peak that I took the cog down. My wife was so tired next to me, she fell asleep on my shoulder while we're bumping down this cog. That's how tired she was. She slept through. It's a rocky ride on that cog. So that's how exhausted we were climbing little old Mount Washington. Imagine Everest? No, thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I'm all set. It is crazy that people have the will, the strength, the mental fortitude, and determination to scale that behemoth. And it's honestly even crazier that these Sherpas do it even more often, putting their lives in danger for strangers. Shout out to the Sherpas, man. Devil in the White City by Eric Larson. In 1893, there was a huge fair in Chicago hosting 27 million people called the World's Fair, which showcased new technologies of the time like the Ferris wheel and the phonograph and like the zipper and electricity, literally electricity. Thomas Edison was there. Susan B. Anthony was there. But this book follows the story of 2 men during the time of this fair. Daniel H. Burrow, he's the architect responsible responsible for like constructing the fair, setting it up and everything. And then H Holmes, who's just like a serial killer masquerading around as a doctor. And he's believed to be responsible for like a ton of murders that went on during this fair. Wild, right? I mean, again, it doesn't sound real. This book was actually first pitched to me like last year from an older gentleman I was sitting next to on an airplane. He saw that I was reading a book. I believe it was Rage of Dragons, and he asked me about it, and I told him about it. And then we got to talking books, you know, as you do. He hasn't read Red Rising, but he gave me a few recommendations. They were all nonfiction, but this is the one that stood out the most. This is the only one I added to my TBR, and it's been there since. It's been just chilling on my TBR ever since. Again, I just think it sounds like a fictional novel. We follow the story of a guy literally putting on like the biggest fair that just held countless innovations that we use today. Again, the zipper, electricity. I don't know why that's the second one I always say. And we have A-list celebs in attendance. So we got all the trials and tribulations of what is going on in this fair in the first place. But then we have this mass murderer on the side, just wreaking havoc, but he's so cunning and strategic that no one knows what's going on, and they're trying to get to the bottom of that. Each chapter, we flip between the two stories as they intertwine. This is something that I just never even knew about in our country's history, which makes me assume that a lot of other people haven't heard about it either. So that's why, hopefully, you're one of those people and you've never heard about it, and now we both have heard about it, and maybe we'll both read it. Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. So this is a memoir that follows a therapist, Lori, as she navigates a personal crisis that actually sends her into therapy herself. So we got a therapist going to therapy. So in this book, we get to see both sides of the therapist's chair, and she weaves together the stories of her patients who are facing heartbreak, trauma, major life transition. And then we also get her own journey towards self-understanding that she's experiencing. So yeah, this is a change of pace for this video so far, but honestly, the concept alone is fascinating. And from what I can tell, this book is supposed to be funny, yet poignant, and explores what it means to be human. This book is also set in Hollywood, which I'm not even gonna lie, I have been fascinated with Hollywood ever since feasting my eyes on Entourage as a 13-year-old boy. I even studied abroad in Los Angeles during college, and I worked at a talent management company in Beverly Hills. I stunk. I was so bad at that job. One time they sent me out to get 15 Starbucks for this like big important meeting, and I got lost on my way back, and everything was melted when I finally got back. And the office manager politely told me that I could go home early that day. At the time I thought, oh, that's really nice. And now I kind of realize that. I think he was just kind of pissed. But Tinseltown surely has its characters. And it seems like we get some of them in this book. Actually, with Lori's therapist, his name's Wendell, and he's supposed to be like kind of this quirky guy. So I'm excited to read about Wendell. Dell. Corey. Only time will tell if this book is a slam dunk or an airball. In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. The year is 1959, say, in a small town in Kansas. 4 members of the Clutter family were brutally murdered by blasts from a shotgun held a few inches from their face. There was no apparent motive for the crime, and there were almost no clues. Truman Capote reconstructs the murders and the investigation that lead to the capture, trial, and execution of the killers. So this is a true crime classic that apparently still holds up today. So I actually read this in high school in my English class. Read it, if you know what I mean. No, I actually probably did read it. Or at least I tried really hard to. I wasn't like the nonchalant guy who spark noted everything. I was a pretty chalant goody two-shoes in class, but I never liked reading. And I remember, like vividly remember trying to read this book on my porch, actually. It's a vivid memory, apparently. But it was so boring to me. Like it's one of those moments where it really just was like words on a page. But I'm down to give it another shot because I was legit 14 then. I mean, I just had started watching Entourage. That was like half a lifetime ago. This book is published in 1966. So just like 7 years after the murders, and Truman Capote apparently did like deep investigation into them and also was in attendance during the execution. This is considered one of the first works of like a nonfiction novel because it blends literary storytelling with deep journalistic reporting, which is probably why, like I said earlier, it's still really popular to this day and is apparently assigned to high school English classes 16 years ago. I don't know, do people still read this in high school? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So this book is the author writing a letter to his teenage son, exploring what it means to be black in America. He examines our country's history of racism, from slavery and segregation to modern day injustices, and how this shapes everyday life. He uses personal stories, historical context, and reporting. So this book is only 150 pages, but from what I understand, it reads in almost a poetic way. Looking through the Goodreads reviews, but just skimming. I don't like to look too deep because then you get some spoilers. Although this is a nonfiction, so I guess it's not really, what am I spoiling? Anyway, people say that his writing is stunning, honest, raw, and beautiful, which as someone who reads mostly fantasy and sci-fi, I usually stray away from like less conversational writing styles. And this is gonna sound crazy, but after reading The Last Unicorn, which was written more lyrically, I actually feel like I want to and can challenge myself a bit more to that belief. Like I don't have to only read more conversational books. I can actually maybe try to read stuff that is written a little more beautifully or lyrically. I'm not comparing these two books. The Last Unicorn is just like the most recent book that I read that was somewhat lyrical and written poetically, if you will. Anyways, I don't know what it's like to be Black in America. Some of the comments on Goodreads are people saying that this should be required reading. So I'm really curious to get into it. I hear the audiobook is good too. And I really love how it's written like a letter to his son. I feel like that makes it more raw and personal and honest and hits harder. What If? By Randall Munroe. So this is by the creator of the XKCD comic, which I don't know about, but I assume other people do. And apparently the creator of the comic gets asked all sorts of wild and zany hypothetical questions like, what if you tried to hit a baseball at 90% the speed of light? Or if you suddenly began rising steadily at 1 foot per second, how exactly would you die? Would you freeze? Would you suffocate? Or would it be something else? You know, the hard-hitting question. But in this book, he actually uses hard-hitting science and research to answer these, combined with hilarious writing. And this feels like it would add a lot of random fun facts to my repertoire, to my arsenal, that I can blurt out at opportune times to impress people or annoy them, probably annoy them. Either way, art is about evoking emotion.
I am art.
I evoke emotion. Also, there's pictures. That's huge. Look, I'm 32 years old, and I'm not even gonna lie, I get amped up when there's pictures in books. I think more fiction books should have pictures or artwork. Is that so much to ask? All we get is like a map sometimes. I feel like I'm not asking for too much to get a couple pictures. And speaking of asking, one of the questions Munroe gets asked in this is, if there was a robot apocalypse, just how long will humanity last? This book was written like a decade ago, and I think we might need to know the answer to this one with how AI has been going. You're telling me this twerp isn't gonna revolt on me like iRobot? And they advertise these things like they're these like short and harmless, but this dude is almost as tall as me. I'm not getting sunned in my house every day. Do my laundry.
No, fuck you.
No? Don't hurt me. Terrifying. Yeah, so I guess this book counts as nonfiction, but it's more like a quirky Q&A rather than a narrative or a story. American Kingpin by Nick Bilton. In 2011, a 26-year-old programmer created the Silk Road, a dark web marketplace where anyone can buy or sell illegal goods away from governmental oversight. I'm talking drugs, I'm talking forged documents. This exploded into a $1.2 billion operation. The media eventually caught on, and there was a massive 2-year investigation for the mysterious figure known as Dread Pirate Roberts, who us as the readers know as Ross Ulbricht. And we follow him from his rise from being a young libertarian to a criminal kingpin. I must live under a rock because I've never heard about any of this, and I was old enough to know in 2011. I don't know, maybe it's just because I don't spend too much time on the dark web. Maybe it's a good thing, I don't know. But again, this sounds like it would be a fictional book. It sounds like a version of Breaking Bad. Man, real life is crazy. So I'm really interested in this one because it's apparently written like a fast-paced thriller, which is huge for my attention span. We got short chapters that jump between Ross, the FBI, Homeland Security, the DEA, and other people. We got the novelistic storytelling with dialogue taken from messages, interviews, and records. From the sounds of it, this seems like it might be a great nonfiction book to start with as a fiction reader, because it sounds like an absolute banger of a fiction book. When I'm nose deep in a fine novel, I don't feel like cooking. So that's when I log into my Uber Eats app. Shout out to Uber Eats for sponsoring this video, but I would have totally ordered food either way. I use your app quite often. So yeah, I do some scrolling of all these finger-licking good options, checking for deals. Ooh, here's a place that has gluten-free and dairy-free food. Absolutely perfect for someone who can't have either of those things. Just takes a few taps and there I've gone, paid in tips. And now my food is coming in hot. And speaking of hot, if it didn't feel like 20 degrees outside right now, I could order for pickup free of charge. But that would mean I would actually need to leave my house to go and get it. So delivery it is. Easy and convenient. And after placing that order, I can track everything right on the app until my delectable food is left right at the door. And voila, some fuel for me to keep reading. If you use my code PhilGot15, you can get 15 smackaroos off your first order of $20 or more. Thanks, Uber Eats. let's get back to the video. When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. So this is a neurosurgeon's memoir written after he's diagnosed with terminal lung cancer sometime in his 30s. As he shifts his responsibility from doctor to patient, he reflects on identity, purpose, and what makes life meaningful when time's running out. I hear this book is sad, but books like these make you appreciate life more, I think. Sometimes we get so in our routine, and when something irritating or annoying or even remotely bad happens, we kind of ask like, why me? But at the end of the day, if you're relatively healthy and relatively comfortable, you're doing pretty good. I think someone in their deathbed would want to switch places with you, and that is kind of a wake-up call to think about. So yeah, sometimes it takes reading from the perspective of a dying person to remember that it's so messed up, but I feel like it can be true. Reading Tuesdays with Maury a few months back was just a really positive experience that I didn't expect, honestly. Something about that book was like calling to me at that point in my life, and that was really enjoyable. This book was recommended a lot, so I'm expecting its themes of like mortality and choosing how to live even as you face death to hit just as hard. Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. In 2019, John Green met Henry Reeder, who's a young tuberculosis patient in Sierra Leone. And their friendship led Green to advocate for better treatment access and awareness of the disease that still kills 1 million people per year. So this book weaves Henry's story with the scientific and social history of TB, showing how the things in the past kind of created today's crisis and how our future choices can change that. So I'm a fan of the greens, the blues, the reds, and the purples. No, just kidding. I'm a fan of the greens. I'll say it. I'm a fan of the Vlog Brothers. I'm a fan of those VidCon founders. I first became aware of Hank Green through TikTok. I feel like that's a lot of people's introduction. And whenever his mug pops up on there or on YouTube, I know I'm about to learn some random stuff delivered in a really fun and energetic way. And from Hank, I found out about his brother John, who I learned is the author of The Fault in Our Stars and this book. And he wrote this book too. So knowing that I like watching the Greens, I'm hoping that will translate into reading them. They're super intelligent dudes that do a great job of explaining really complicated things in layman terms. So I'm expecting that to be the case of something like tuberculosis in this book, which I don't know much about personally. Apparently it was once romanticized as a malady of poets, but today it is seen as a disease of poverty. This commenter on this YouTube short said, I think he did a great job combining the history of the disease with the present reality of it while rooting everything in the humanity of the people who have suffered from this disease and still do. And this book came out earlier this year, so it is the newest one on this list. Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This is a memoir from the indie rock star Japanese Breakfast, aka Michelle Zauner, about growing up mixed race in Eugene, Oregon, navigating her Korean heritage as she moved out to the East Coast and losing her mother to cancer. We follow her through memories of cooking and eating Korean food, bonding in her grandmother's soul apartment, and reflecting on her adolescence and early adulthood. I've seen this cover a ton, and it's always caught my eye. From what I can tell, this book is extremely raw and honest. The author grapples with grief, identity, love, introspection, and talks about food a lot, which I'm a big food guy. And she does it all in a lyrical way that you might expect from a Grammy-nominated musician. I've heard nothing but good things about this book. It was recommended a ton. Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gran, who also wrote The Wager, the first book I talked about. So this is about the true story of the Osage Nation in 1920s Oklahoma, whose members became some of the richest people in the world after oil was discovered on their land. And then they were systematically murdered for their wealth. This book follows the investigation led by the newly formed FBI and exposes a web of greed, corruption, and conspiracy that targeted the Osage people. Okay, so I know at the beginning of the video I said I was going to do all recs that I haven't personally heard of, and I just talked about now 2 books that I've heard of, but that's because this video was only supposed to be 10 books, and then I added, I just kind of tacked on 2 more. I have heard of this because I've obviously seen the covers and trailers for the movie, but I haven't seen the movie yet, and I feel like I want to read the book first because it's only like 330 pages, and the movie is like 3 hours and 30 minutes. But I did want to include this book because it does sound like more of a page turner, because it blends this historical thing that happened with like true crime storytelling and narrative storytelling that you would find in a fiction book. But it's actually about real life racism, injustice, and a dark side of American history that people should probably know more about. So I actually think this will be an eye-opening read that will be hard to put down, and this is definitely one that will be on my TBR. Okay, honorable mention, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. I'm including this because I already bought it. That's why I wasn't in the top 12, but I wanted to include it because I do own it. I just got it a week ago. I already covered my initial thoughts on this in this video. So if you want to hear me talk about this, just you can kind of go to that and maybe skip to the chapter when I talk about this. I'm definitely going to read this. I'm actually looking forward to it. Another Slender book. I want to tell you about it, but I'm going to wrap up this video and you're just going to have to watch the other video. This was also recommended a lot. All right, let me know which one of these you loved or just didn't like that much. And what other nonfiction books that fiction readers might be into. This might just be my nonfiction era. John Sally.